So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are Title IX Consulting Group, and we're very happy to be providing this free webinar on investigations, how to build a strong and compliant investigation team with a particular focus on the intersection of Title IX and Title VI. Today, we will be going over different policy, different legal, different procedural areas. And I have the honor of presenting today with two of my amazing colleagues, Amber and Beth. And I'm going to go ahead and share the floor with them for about a minute so that they can introduce themselves, even though we have a very full hour awaiting all of us. Let's go ahead and have them introduce themselves very quickly.
I will go first. My name is Amber Nesbitt. I'm an attorney and consultant with the Title IX Consulting Group. And for the last 6 years or more, I built and led the Title IX investigations team for the Chicago Public Schools, which is the 4th largest school district in the country, and had an independent investigative unit with over 30 staff members handling 450 complaints each school year.
Hi, everybody. I am Beth Ackman. I'm a Title IX investigator with the Title IX Consulting Group and an outreach coordinator. I also am a housing specialist. I have over 20 years in higher education between residence life, conduct, and admissions, and look forward to today.
Great. Thank you both. And my name is Dr. Sandy. I am the CEO and founder of Title IX Consulting Group. And our group does do all civil rights compliance, Title IX, Clery Act compliance, and supports for K-12 and higher education. And again, we're just very thrilled to be providing this webinar. Our last webinar was on pregnant and parenting student infrastructure and building that out within school systems. So if you would like to be linked to that, feel free to write us in the chat or look it up on YouTube. It's under Title IX Consulting Group's YouTube channel. So let's go ahead and get started. In order to get started, I want to be sure to read out this disclaimer. We are not giving you legal advice today. Consult with your legal counsel regarding how best to address a specific situation. There are a variety of stakeholders listening, so please keep that in mind as you submit questions in the chat. And we'll do our best to get to that at the end of our session today, but because we have so much information, we may need to answer questions after this webinar, and we'll do so through email. So please keep that in mind as well. Feel free to ask general questions and hypotheticals. And watch your inbox for a link to the slides. Those should be sent out by tomorrow, if not later today. And also check out the recording that will also be sent to your email by next week. So our agenda for today, we'll start off with the legal perspective. Amber's going to go over 4 specific tips that really covers what legal implications are between Title VI and Title IX and how to look at the legal perspective when you're doing investigations, especially to build a robust investigation team. From there, we're going to do a procedural perspective that Beth will be guiding and providing best practices. That will be 3 different tips in regards to investigation teams that will cover the span of all civil rights, discrimination, and providing information on that. And we'll close with a policy perspective with 2 specific tips from the policy perspective, providing information on infrastructure changes and information for Title VI and Title IX for schools to start thinking about for implementation for strengthening their investigation teams and also strengthening how their schools and campuses are looking at Title VI overall. And so to get us going, Amber is going to go ahead and start with the legal perspective.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. Before I jump into the tips that we'll discuss, I wanted to make sure we all have the same kind of basic foundational information here on the regulations that we'll be discussing. So we'll start with Title VI. Title VI was enacted as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in any program or activity that receives federal financial assistance. This is not limited to just educational institutions, but that's obviously what we'll be focusing on here today. Title VI can extend to religion when the discrimination is based on shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, including citizenship in a country with a dominant religious ancestry. Yeah, there we go. So Title VI protections have been interpreted to include English learner students, anti-Semitic and Islamophobic conduct, physical features such as style of dress and names that may reflect an ethnic or religious tradition, and actual and perceived membership in the protected groups. Title IX is specifically geared towards educational programs and activities and prohibits sex discrimination in any program or activity that receives federal funding. So that includes virtually every school, institution, university, college across the country. And it seeks to ensure that students, regardless of sex or gender, have equal opportunities in education and athletics. So this covers a wide variety of conduct that includes hostile environment harassment, quid pro quo harassment, sexual violence, abuse, and assault, unequal access to educational resources and opportunities, and pregnant discrimination. So whether we're talking about Title VI, Title IX, Title VII, any of the regulations and other state laws, schools do have a responsibility to respond promptly and effectively. And to do that, there's really a multifaceted approach where you have to have policies, training, complaint review and assessment procedures, establish investigation processes, interim safety and support measures, and more. Today, we're really just focusing on the investigative aspect of that program, and specifically how institutions can build strong and compliant investigative teams that are ready to respond to complaints promptly. Beyond compliance with regulations, detailed and organized and impartial investigations can help mitigate risk to institutions, decreasing liability, stopping misconduct before it continue and escalate, support a warm and welcoming environment for all, and just improve community morale. So it's, compliance is a major focus here, but it really goes beyond that. Okay, so my first tip is to have consistent and written practices. So when you have a team of investigators handling allegations coming in, whether they're Title VI, Title IX, both of those things, allegations coming in under school policies that are related to Title VI and Title IX complaints, you want to make sure that you have written guides for each phase of the investigative process that will help your team with consistent decision making and make sure that you have fair and equitable procedures throughout. These guides should be tailored to the circumstances of your own team and institution. They have to comply with Title IX's procedural requirements, which can be very detailed, but they also should really be tailored to the circumstances of your institution. These written guides would look very different for a team of 30 investigators in a large K-12 district as compared to a small Title IX office in a smaller college or institution. But the goal of these written guides is to avoid confusion and uncertainty among your investigators. You want to support timely and consistent decisions. And by doing that, you can also eliminate claims of conflicting practices and bias in your investigations. This can also help you identify areas for investigative discretion, so areas where your investigative team can make their own decisions in the moment, and the higher level or more detailed decisions that need supervisor approval or consultation. So these are just some examples of concerns and ideas that you would want to consider for these written guides for the intake and complete assessment criteria. So your team should have guidance available to them when complaints come in that help them decide and determine if the complaint in question is a Title IX complaint right at the beginning, or do they need more information? If they need more information, the team should know, and the document should reflect who is responsible for obtaining that information. And what guidance do those people have? For example, in a K-12 context, if a complaint comes in that's kind of too vague to really make any determinations about Title IX or appropriate next steps, if the principal or school counselor is tasked with getting more information from the complainant, they should know what kinds of information to collect. Do you want them to do a full intake investigation, or does that really belong to the Title IX and investigative team, and you just need them to get a little bit more information so that you can work from there? You always want to be cautious about subjecting complainants and students and witnesses across the board to repeated interviews. It can be traumatizing to continuously repeat their allegations and information. You may end up with conflicting information. So you want to make sure that there's a concise process on the front end to help you work through and discern what allegations are actually being made. These written guides should also help your team know what to do if a complaint is particularly severe or if there are safety concerns, particularly with a sexual assault or abuse, like a very serious allegation that may be received. So your team should have this document that tells them when police should be called and who is calling the police. When should child protective departments or agencies be called as well, and who is doing that? But also for severe safety concerns, this document should help your team navigate when a staff member may need to be removed from duty until more information is obtained, who makes that decision, what that process looks like. These should not be issues that they're grappling with as the complaint is already in hand. They should have this material ready to refer to so that they can move quickly through these decisions. These written guides, excuse me, should also help them decide what to do when a complaint does not meet the Title IX threshold, or perhaps Title VI or VII. And maybe it's a potential violation of a school policy, but the allegations themselves don't quite hit that Title IX threshold yet. What happens to those complaints? That your team should know, what happens there. Who should be speaking with the complainants? What happens if those allegations actually escalate in those initial intake conversations? And lastly, just as a suggestion, these written guides should also help your team determine which version of the Title IX regulations apply based on when the conduct occurred. As we move farther away from the 2024 regulations not being applicable, this won't be as much of an issue, but for a time, our teams were working under some 2020 cases, 2024 regulation cases, delayed outcries may be under a previous version. So really making sure that your team is able to determine which regulations apply to each complaint. Turning to investigation procedures. These are, again, just examples of things that you want your team to have in writing so that they are consistent and readily available for your team to refer to. So things like, what factors do you consider before you seize and search a staff member's laptop and phone? Obviously, a school-issued laptop and phone. When does that happen? What's the procedure for doing that? How do you obtain school video footage, and how quickly is it overwritten? A lot of schools will have 30-day destruction timelines just because there's so much video footage being recorded. School buses in the K-12 context often have much shorter destruction timelines. So your team wants to know what those are because that can be critical information or evidence that you don't want to lose. Also in the K-12 context, your team should have written documentation explaining whether parental consent is required before you interview student complainants and witnesses, how they obtain that consent, and how do they document that consent. In my experience at the Chicago Public Schools, we often had difficulty getting in touch with parents. They're working, they're in school, they're busy during the days. And so, having an expectation for the team of how many times they're going to reach out to that parent, and how they may do that. Can they text them? Can they email them? These kinds of logistical things should all be documented for your team. Other considerations beyond what's just on this slide would include Interview styles, can they be virtual? What circumstances is a virtual interview appropriate instead of an in-person interview? Are your interviews recorded or are they done in teams with someone taking notes? All those kind of procedural things should be documented and really thought through so that they make sense for your own institution. The other thing I would add here as well is the evidence documentation procedures. There should be a consistent practice for how you are identifying attachment or exhibits and other documents that you've obtained and the source of those so that you always have a chain of custody documented. Also documenting evidence and information that you were not able to obtain despite your best efforts. So, for example, if you tried to contact 5 different potential student witnesses and they either didn't call you back if they're in college and were not willing to participate, or parents declined to participate, you want to have documentation of those efforts because it really helps reflect how robust your investigation was. And down the road, it does show that you attempted to obtain this evidence and it just wasn't available to you. So tip number 2 is, even though I just finished talking about having written documentation that accounts for as many of these scenarios as you can, you also want to embrace flexibility and creativity in the actual investigative processes. So your team should have flexibility to follow the evidence where it leads them, and think outside the box when they do encounter roadblocks. So I would encourage your team to get creative with potential avenues for corroboration. In the K-12 space in particular, you may have student complainants who are 6 years old, 7 years old, all the way up to 17, 18 years old. You're going to, have a wide variety of expectations for what they can share and reliably explain in chronological order for you. So in that space in particular, but in any investigation, you want to really think beyond, witnesses and interviews, and what other evidence might be out there for you to explore corroborating evidence. I would encourage your team to collaborate with each other. Sometimes just having someone with fresh eyes looking at, some investigative file or other information may be able to offer you a different perspective. When you're in the weeds working through something, sometimes you just don't see it, and your colleagues can help navigate that for you. I would strongly discourage having a rigid checklist or investigative plan that they have to follow in every case. Something from complainant interview check, witness check, witness number 2 check, and then subject interview. You don't want to have, such a rigid checklist. Again, you want to make sure your investigations are as robust and expansive as possible and as necessary under the allegations. Along the way, your team should also be trained not only in Title IX, but also Title VI, school policies, and all these other allegations that often are implicated in investigations, so that they can identify new allegations that are being made during interviews or otherwise, and know what to do with those allegations when they do come up. In my experience, it's rare that investigation or allegations fit neatly into a little bucket of simply Title IX without expanding into, other school policy violations, potentially Title VI concerns. So you really want to make sure that your team is trained to identify new and different allegations and know how to handle those as they come up. Okay, so tip number 3. I strongly recommend that there's a practice of establishing checkpoints for each investigation. Most civil rights investigators at institutions are juggling multiple cases at a time. They each have different deadlines and procedural or administrative requirements that are derived from the different regulations or school policies. So this goes back to the written guidance as well. This should all be documented as part of the intake procedure. your team should be adding to their calendars known deadlines at the outset of each investigation. So for example, in Title IX cases, they should have a recurring 90-day reminder that a status letter is due with a few days, reminder a few days before that so they can make sure they get it out on time. Losing track of these deadlines and notice requirements can be a major problem. I have met with OCR to review compliance with resolution agreements, and I was surprised by their focus on the missing or delayed update letters. They would ask, why was this letter 10 days late beyond the due date? And we're all human, especially in large volume situations. Everyone is trying their best, but these are easy things for the Department of Education to flag. So I would really encourage you just to get a regular practice that your team does in the very beginning where they're calendaring these known deadlines and really sticking to it. But beyond those like very easy to identify deadlines, like the 90-day letters, there are other obligations that come up, especially in the Title IX 2020 regs, that can be easier to lose sight of, especially when you're working multiple cases and things are moving really quickly. So an example might be, that maybe there's a new party that needs to be added, or there's new allegations that need to be added, and a revised notice of allegation needs to be sent out. Sometimes when you're in the weeds of investigations and you're working through things, you're not thinking about these administrative requirements. So they're, much easier to lose sight of. So to address that, I strongly recommend that your team have a practice of having established benchmark check-in dates, ideally with the investigator supervisor, where they both review the file, make sure that there's no new allegation that needs to come or be addressed, whether it's a Title IX allegation or a non-Title IX allegation. Are there any new parties that need to be added to the investigation? Anything new or different that they need to address through a revised notice? Is it a potential Title IX dismissal? Are the allegations really not adding up, or is the complainant not willing to participate and there's insufficient other avenues for investigation? There's different factors and checkpoints or decisions that can be made at these checkpoints. You can also take the opportunity to make sure all of your 90-day letters and the pre-interview letters have been sent. A late letter is better than no letter. So, it's a chance for you to review the file and make sure everything has been covered. And finally, when you're in the process of investigating and working through interviews, it can be easy to lose sight of patterns that may be forming. And so by reviewing the full file at these regular checkpoints, you have an opportunity to read things through fully. And sometimes you'll see a pattern that you maybe hadn't identified, or other concerns that you actually need to now address in your investigation as well. As an added just practice point, I would suggest that these same checkpoints be used for non-Title IX or Title VI complaints. So any investigation that is being handled under your school or school policies or other state laws, I would recommend the same procedure, not only so your team is used to doing it, but also because allegations can escalate. What might start with kind of a lower threshold potential school policy violation can quickly become a Title IX violation. So you want to make sure that those are caught as well. So yeah, the overall recommendation here is to have these established checkpoints that are set at the very beginning of a case. So you're calendaring your 90-day letters and any other notice letters you're aware of, but also whether it's 30 days or every 45 days, you schedule these recurring meetings with an investigator and potentially their supervisor, where they're expected to go through the file and do this kind of full file review to make sure that everything has been accounted for and all notices have been sent. Okay. And then tip number 4 is to be aware of the interplay between civil rights regulations. I would throw in there also state laws, municipal and city laws that might apply, and school policies. So a well-trained investigative team should be able to navigate the different regulations that are at play, and the different school policies. As I said before, complaints rarely fit into neat boxes. They can, what can start as one complaint might kind of blend into something different. There may be multiple different types of regulations implicated in an investigation. So investigators should really know how to identify those other allegations and how to navigate them. So this is an example from a case that I've personally worked on involving a young student. She was 12 years old. She reported feeling very uncomfortable and started skipping class because her male teacher was regularly touching her in class. So that's a big concern. She's starting to skip class. It's affecting her education. Through interviews with her, we learned that the teacher had a habit of tapping students on the shoulder or back as they walked through the classroom. It's not an unusual, thing for teachers to do. And other students did corroborate that the teacher had a habit of doing this. This student in question had asked the teacher to stop touching her, but he hadn't. So the conduct in question likely is not going to meet the Title IX threshold. However, the student explained to our investigators that the student felt very uncomfortable, in particular because of her religious beliefs. And she didn't think any adult male who was not part of her family should really be touching her. That student is entirely entitled to not be touched in that way. So something that starts off as potentially a Title IX violation can very quickly become a potential Title VI violation that still needs to be addressed. And another example of how complaints can kind of change and expand over time. Another example might be, 3 female students report that they believe their teacher treats African American students worse than others. And they give examples of demeaning comments, refusing to call on them in class, not giving them the same opportunities. And during the course of that investigation, the investigator speaks to students of other races, and other female students are sharing almost identical concerns as the complainants. And so now you have to really consider both Title VI and Title IX considerations and really try and unpack what is happening here. Potentially it's a violation of one, both, or neither. So this is an example of having a well-trained investigative team that can identify and look for these other concerns and patterns and know what to do with them when they do encounter them.
Thank you, Amber. So we're now going to switch over to the procedural perspective, and Beth is going to guide this part.
Hi, everybody. So while I'm doing procedural perspective, I'll also cover tips 5, 6, and 7 throughout the slide. Okay, so best practices, I guess, is it doesn't matter if you're investigating a Title 6, 7, 9, 100. It doesn't matter. All the steps are very simple. Best practices are best practices. So again, these are all recommendations that we would highly recommend that you use when you are doing an investigation to make sure it's fair. Okay, so best practices for building rapport with your interviewees. So this is creating a safe environment, building trust through transparency, practicing active listening, using empathetic communication, empowering the interviewee, be culturally responsive, minimize re-traumatizing, which Amber kind of covered at the beginning, and support post-interview needs. So I'm going to go into what each one of those are. So creating a safe environment. You want to choose a neutral but private, comfortable space and explain what the interview process is going to look like. It's very important that this is a neutral space, that it is private. So if you're in a room, you don't want the conversation to be heard outside the door, things of that nature. At a couple of the colleges I've worked at, we've used noisemakers outside the door, like just the dead air noisemakers. So that way, any conversation that was being had was considered still private. Build trust, be transparent. So with that, that's Again, going over like, what is this going to include? Having your boundaries set, being open, body language, don't sit like crossed, all negative. Be open. Have your hands out in front of you is what I always tell people, like, so that they feel that you are more open than kind of shutting it off from the beginning. Practice active listening. So I always go back to a quote that my great grandma used to say, which is, you have one mouth and two ears, use them accordingly. So make sure you listen to the person. Don't be ready to give them another answer. Don't try to lead the conversation. This is where you need to reflect and validate without interrupting. Use supportive cues, show that you understand what they're saying. If there is an area that you don't understand, ask for clarity. But when you're asking for clarity, you also have to be empathetic with your communication. Don't yell, don't use a tone. Make sure you sound friendly, make sure you sound welcoming. Don't be leading with your questions. Don't be judgmental with your questions. Like, well, could have you done this different, and like change your tone? You don't want to do any of those things, because as soon as you change your tone or change your body language while you are building a rapport, you're going to cancel it. So you're not going to get any further. So always make sure you stay open. Empower the interviewee. So reinforce that this is participation, that this is voluntary, that you're just here to help and listen and see what happened. Be culturally responsive, acknowledge and respect the diversity, adapt to approaches to fit individual needs. That can be a whole bunch of things. For example, while you're creating a safe environment, make sure that it's ADA compliant, because you might have someone that cannot get to you if you're on the 5th floor of a building. So there's all different ways to be culturally responsive. Minimize re-traumatization, big thing. They are coming to you because they want to share what happened to them. They need you to be understanding and open about that. So you don't want to repeat, like make them say it over and over and over again. It's going to be graphic. You don't want to ask them a graphic question. You want them to just share with you what they can. Also, always ask what is necessary for fact finding. Don't, again, try to lead the conversation. Support post-interview needs. I always say, when I would be in my office, I would have like different things to give to somebody. Follow up for therapy, follow up for police, follow up for our office hours, anything so that they know how to, one, get back in contact with you, but also other resources that are available. You want to make sure that they feel comfortable, and that they're ready to go on to the next steps when you're done with the conversation. So you can always check in with them emotionally, for safety and next steps, make sure that they're ready to go, and give them the resources that are needed. And the safety tip number 5 is build trust by setting clear expectations at the start of the interview. That's very important, I've always said. And then explain the process, their rights, and what to expect. This helps reduce anxiety and fosters a sense of safety. But you have to make sure you do all these other steps while you're doing that, because the second you change your tone or change your body language, it can change the whole interview process. So make sure that, yes, you set clear expectations, but also in your head, be checking yourself to be like, am I being open? Am I not doing anything that is sounding negative or closed off? It's very important. You would be shocked at how much your body language and tone can affect an interview. Okay, so you've done the interview and now you're like wanting to make sure that you're conducting a fair and thorough analysis of the evidence. So you have to understand the law and organize the categories and the evidence, evaluate relevance and credibility, consider legal definitions and standards, inform and culture aware of trauma, ensure fairness and equity, address power dynamics and patterns. This happens a lot when it's like faculty, staff from the higher ed side, or boss, employee, teacher, student. Avoid bias and ensure consistency, document the analytical processes thoroughly, draft a clear and legally sounded analysis. So again, as I said before, this doesn't matter if it's Title 6, 7, 9, or 100. You need to know your laws. So Title 4, Title 5, Title 6, Title 9, make sure you understand what they are when you're going into it. If you don't have that, you can't make sure that you're following the right process or making sure that the right law is being fulfilled. That was discriminated against, things of that nature. Organize and category the evidence. So group type, interview, visual, digital, did you get a video of it? Did you get pictures of it? Documents. Have everything categorized so you know this is the interview, this is a video that was sent in, these are additional documents that were submitted for the report, and then here's physical evidence if there's clothes or a letter or something like that. Then you want to look at the access of how each piece connects to the misconduct or the policy violation. Make sure it's credible, make sure it's consistent, detail. You want to make sure that your information that you have actually is related to the topic that you're just dealing with and the case that you're dealing with. Because sometimes you will find that cases overlap with different laws, and that's where you want to make sure that you're following the right directive. Match your evidence against definitions. So that's where you go when you look at the law and be like, okay, this is a Title 6, but this is a Title 9. Make sure your evidence is matching and apply the preponderance of evidence when looking at everything. Recognize your trauma responses, especially in your Title 9 cases. Those can be more emotional, so make sure that you're being aware of the trauma responses, and that's where you, again, don't want to re-victimize when you're doing it. So make sure when you do your interview, you get all the information the first time. Be alert. That's in a couple different ones. Because you want to be aware of everything. The biggest way to make this fair and thorough is to be fair and thorough when you're doing your investigation and you're reviewing all of your evidence. When you're addressing power dynamics and patterns, consider institutional roles. From the higher ed side, I always say student, staff, supervisor, employee. With K through 12, teacher, student, always see if there is any power dynamics or patterns that are showing. Avoid bias and ensure consistency. So recess any bias that is in any of the reports, make sure that it does not show. If there is a question or concern, always go back to the person that you got the evidence from. Document and be analytical process. So record your method for weighing and comparing evidence. Like, why are you not using this digital recording anymore? Why are you not using this part of the investigation anymore? You have to be able to explain that. Know how legal and institutional standards were applied. Not every college is the same. When you are doing a documentation, not every high school is the same, things of that. So you have to make sure you're within policies of the college or K through 12 or company you're working with. So at the end, you want to draft a clear, legally sounded report. Use objective, neutral language, clearly state findings, supporting your evidence, include rationale and note of any unresolved conflicts in your evidence. So those questions that you had when you're reviewing it, why do you have that question? You want to definitely state that. For tip 6, always match the evidence to the specific definitions and standards under Title 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, all of them, 100. This ensures your analysis is not only thorough, but also legally sounded and defensible. Okay, so now we're going to draft your investigation report. The one thing I always say is check with the college or K through 12 or company you work with. Sometimes the draft goes straight to the deputy coordinator. Sometimes it goes to the Title IX coordinator. Sometimes it goes, just know the process. So first thing is you're going to do your introduction, scope of the evidence, and applicable policies. So this is where you need to know the policies and procedures of your institution, but also of the law. So scope of the investigation is where you literally conduct who is involved. So you put the complaint's name, the respondent's name, the date of the incident, and where it occurred. Then for applicable policies, you want to make sure that you are conducting in accordance with different laws, and also within the policies of the college or institution. Then you need to list your parties involved. So you have to list first the complainant, their name, their role, and their relationship. Then the respondent, their name, their role, relationship, and then any witnesses. You want to list the witnesses that were interviewed. Okay, so allegations. You want to talk in your allegations about the alleged behavior, the dates and location of the incident, and the type that alleged Title IX violation. So what Title IX violation aspect? So summary of allegations is stated that you want to have the alleged behavior. You definitely have to have the dates and times, and then what type was it? Sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, dating violence, etc. You just want to make sure that you have the right allegation listed so you can make sure it moves forward properly. Now we get into all the detail stuff. Procedural history. So you want to do the date it was filed, who was noticed, interviews conducted, evidence collected, and supportive measures implemented. If you did not use a piece of your evidence that was collected, do not put it in this part of the report. It'll be at the end. And you can write why it was not used. Again, those are your evidence collected is your text messages, your videos, your emails, and your witness statements. Supportive measurements can be anything that is outside of your evidence collected. So if there was other information that came prior after you were already working on this document, you would put those in. Evidence summary. So you want to organize this chronically if possible. That way it'll show an open picture of what happened from beginning to end. So statements from parties, witness testimonies, your documentation, digital evidence, and your policy references. So statements of parties is key with the context. So you want it to be quoted if possible. Witness testimonies, you want to put if there's conflicting accounts or if there's corroborating accounts, sorry. For documenting digital, that's again, those screenshots, emails, letters, photos, audio. Everybody has a cell phone nowadays, so you sometimes get a lot of videos from different perspectives. You want to put all of that in. Policy references, so matching and finding the policies. So is this harassment? Is this hostility, hostile environment? Is this sexual assault? You want to have the law and you want to have the policy of the institution you're working for. Analysis. So the analysis is your standard of evidence, your credible assessment, application of facts to policy, and considerations of bias or conflict interest. So with your standard of evidence, it's a preponderance of evidence. So it is what is provided to you. That is what's counted as your preponderance of evidence. Credible assessment is the method used to assess credibility. So the consistency, the corroboration, the motivation, things of that nature. Just try to keep the emotion out of this part. Application of facts to policy. Determine whether behavior meets the definition of Title IX. So this is where you're explaining in your report that this is why it meets Title IX and this is where the violation occurred. This is how it matches for the violation. Then you want to consider if there is any bias or conflicting interest. So if this is where you're wondering when you're working on your report, you can state if any existed and how it was addressed. So if you saw from your evidence that the statements didn't match, they were conflicting and not corroborating, you can put this in there. And now you're moving on to your findings. So what you want to do is summarize this for whoever's receiving this report. Is it the Title IX deputy coordinator? Is it Title IX coordinator? Is it somebody else? Is it a superintendent? Is it a vice president? So this is where you want to make sure that they see your findings. If you think they're responsible or not responsible, you summarize it. You clearly state the rationale of each conclusion. With the conclusions, it's the investigation has been completed in compliance with the institution policies and the federal regulations. So that's where at the beginning, you had to show how you believed it was a Title IX and you believed it followed under this policy of your institution. And then the report is submitted to the decision maker. Your appendices are where you will have your list of all the interviews that were conducted. So that would be, and then the copies of the evidence. So all the different evidence, your chronicle key of events. Again, you want to have it from top to end, and then your policy aspects will be added in there too. And the tip for this, so this is tip 7. When drafting a Title IX investigation report, clearly connect the facts to the policy definitions. This ensures your findings are grounded in evidence, not assumptions, and it helps the decision maker apply the correct standard of proof.
Thank you, Beth. All right. So we have about 12 minutes or so left, and I'm going to wrap up this presentation with the policy perspective. So I've put together a quick little Venn diagram, and this is just highlighting some of the policy aspects for Title VI and Title IX, where there is some overlap for investigation teams to just always remember and to consider when they are working on an investigation, or if they've received something and they are starting to think about and think through all their next steps for an investigation. As Beth mentioned, and as Amber mentioned, understanding the overlaps between different sorts of discrimination policies is always going to be important, and that includes for your investigation teams. So as Amber described the different discrimination types under Title VI and Title IX, I've gone ahead and listed those on both sides. The additional portion that is different between the two that is listed here is formal complaints. So under Title VI, no formal complaint is necessary to start an investigation. So this is different from Title IX, where Title IX, as we see it under the 2020 Title IX regulations, you need to have a written formal complaint that's submitted. With Title VI, the difference here is it can be written, it can be verbal. And so an investigation can actually begin without a formal complaint for Title VI. Some of the overlapping areas for investigation teams to consider, remember, and be educated on, and to begin to start thinking about, especially now that we have more of an emphasis on Title VI coming across our tables, is the fact that both Title VI and Title IX are protections for students. They're primarily a protection for students. And yes, there can be an employee implication under both. And typically when we see that, that's where we see HR departments at schools and at campuses handling Title VII. Title VII handles all the protections of discrimination that employees might face. And, you know, what you might see now happening and developing is if the Title IX coordinator is going to become the Title VI coordinator, they might be working in conjunction with the HR director or whoever is in charge of Title VII protections. And that's something to consider and to think about for investigation teams, especially as we move forward with Title VI. Additionally, another area that is similar between Title VI and Title IX is that harassment can be a discrimination under both that creates hostile environments. As both Amber and Beth described, Title IX has additional nuances, as does Title VI, but this is where they overlap. There is this area of harassment creating hostile environment that is covered under both. Additionally, both protect against interference with the student's success. So if something is, or if any type of behavior, if there's any type of concern that is negatively affecting a student's academic trajectory, this is a direct violation of their rights under Title VI or Title IX or any civil rights discrimination. And so this is another area that does have an overlap between the two. Additionally, important for investigation teams to always remember that if someone is being targeted under discrimination, it can be either that the investigation is investigating something that happened to an individual person or to a group of people. And again, this is another overlapping area. Title VI and Title IX both state that a school, when they have actual notice, an investigation should begin. And so that's important because the wording is very similar across both. The only difference, which you see highlighted in yellow here, is that Title VI also has an additional component. For Title VI, there can also be something called constructive notice. So let's just say that at a campus or at a school, everybody knows somebody is being targeted because of their race or their color. Yet the administration, knowing about it, has heard rumors about it, is not looking into it. At a bare minimum, the administration needs to be looking into it and do a soft inquiry into, is anyone being hurt? Is everything okay? Really look at it, because even if it's not a solid investigation, you want to show that you are doing your due diligence to be compliant to protect the students themselves from any form of discrimination. And so actual notice, yes, is important for both, but for Title VI, you also are going to be responsible to answer to constructive notice. Another overlapping area is that schools must take prompt and effective steps to end, eliminate, and prevent behavior. Those of us that have been doing Title IX, for decades, we've all seen this type of wording, for a long time. But the same wording is actually listed under Title VI. And so for investigation teams, it's important for you to remember and understand, just like Beth was describing, that care, that support, building that trust. One step that investigation teams should always be implementing is providing those resources, ensuring that you're taking effective steps to be sure that they're okay. That might be giving them information on the therapist or a counselor on campus or at the school site, or letting them know there's accommodations that can be given to them, supportive measures, interim measures, things of that nature. Additionally, investigation teams should know and recognize that there are jurisdiction for both Title VI and Title IX that matter. Both will have investigations because of behavior that is concerning on campus. Both can have investigations for behavior that's concerning that's off campus. I know Title IX has a little bit more of a restriction right now under 2020 Title IX regulations, but when we look at Title VI, you're looking at on campus, off campus, and even online behaviors that are concerning that should be looked into and investigated. So my tip for number 8 is to understand policy overlap between Title VI and Title IX. And from there, what I want to share is a quick bird's eye view of how to look at Title VI and Title IX's policy, because Amber and Beth did a great job of really giving us, the nuts and bolts of investigations, the things that you need to be sure you're doing for, any type of discrimination. It does not matter the civil rights violation. But what about that infrastructure for those of us that are the admin looking at how do we start developing this for our investigation teams? So here are some considerations for your infrastructure. Specifically, train students and employees on what Title VI is, who is the point of contact for Title VI reporting. And all of this is going to start looking like Title IX types of implementation. And it's on purpose because of the fact that civil rights protections against all forms of civil rights discrimination need to be addressed at your campuses, at your schools. And so we're going to start looking at things that you need to have in place for that infrastructure. And it's going to look a lot like Title IX, the things that you've already done. So making sure that those trainings are in place, making sure that you have your websites with visibility on Title VI. Who's the point of contact? What's their phone number? How do people report to them? What are the processes and procedures? How is it handled? Additionally, make sure that you have some training going on for your campus police and or school security to understand Title VI and who to contact in case they see something or they're concerned about behavior. Maybe someone is targeting somebody else because of their color, their race. All of that's going to be important to ensure that your campus, your school knows how to address those things and that it wasn't just dismissed. Look at your policies under discrimination, harassment, and your protest policies as well, and update those procedures. Also cross-check with employee handbooks and student handbooks as well. Create resources and supportive measures for Title VI concerns. As we are looking at, ensuring that you are effectively and promptly addressing any concerns that come forward or any concerns that might be suspicious and or concerning, be sure that you can list supportive measures within these policies and procedures to show that you've thought this through. Have sanctions listed as well for individuals that potentially can be found responsible in Title VI cases. And consider Clery Act implications. This is specifically for higher education campuses. Think about your CSAs, your campus security authorities. Are they getting trained? Do they know who to contact? Do they understand what to do for any sort of cultural biases and or hate crimes that are happening? Do they know where to report that information? Obviously, that is non-identifiable information for those of us that are doing Clery implementation. But it's still going to be important to connect the dots between Title VI and the Clery Act. And so overall, civil rights compliance reality is the fact that many times schools wait to increase compliance until after there's a problem. And I've seen this across the board. I know Amber has seen this at the OCR. I know I've seen this especially with expert reports I've done for lawsuits, where schools may have just not done any updates on website information, have done no updates on policies and procedures, and they truly wait until there's a serious problem, which is a very high cost to them. So our recommendation is that whatever you've done with Title IX so far, it's time to do the same implementation with Title VI, because that infrastructure is going to safeguard your investigation team robustness to ensure that they understand what to do if they do come across any form of civil rights discrimination case. And so my tip number 9 is to create a Title VI infrastructure similar to Title IX. And so with 2 minutes left, I do thank everyone for joining us today. This is how to build out a strong and compliant investigation team. And we did do some very interesting information today to really go over legal perspective, procedural perspective, and policy perspective, which is all very important in speaking towards how to create those strong and compliant investigation teams. Please be sure to follow us. We have a YouTube channel that you can follow us there, and you get educational resources. We have our webinars and our podcasts all listed there. We have our podcast, Title IX Insider, and you can scan your cell phone up right now. And if you're not part of our monthly newsletters already, please be sure to sign up for that. And with 1 minute left, I thank everyone for joining us today. Beth, Amber, thank you so much. And have a wonderful day, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this.